This is the critical reflective account that I did for assignment 1. It's kind of our design documentation, if you will. So here I have an image or a screen grab of like each one of the outputs that I created in my designs, in my coding. And so I talk about my aesthetic choices, so about why I chose my color palette, which is pastel, which I chose to tie in with my personal website, which I've since pulled down to rebrand to make it look a bit more professional, but that's another story. And then in terms of like images and shapes and things like that, I really love textiles, and I was quite interested in things that could translate well to print motifs. So I looked at that a lot as well. And then here I just have some of the fonts that I used, and mostly in this one, nothing else actually used fonts, and my color palette that I tried to use across each of the designs. And you'll see if you've seen the video for this one where I mix the colors, I tried extremely hard to mix a pastel looking color palette for this drawing so that it matched the rest in this documentation. So this was my approach to the creative process. So I followed IDEO's design thinking approach, which I really love, although please forgive me, IDEO, I usually try and skip step 6, which is be visual. I often avoid sketching, but again, something I'm working on. So a lot of things that went into my process were brainstorming. I did do a little bit of sketching, and I started trying not to be limited by what was possible, which in some ways was quite easy because I did my brainstorm for every brief at the very start before I really knew much about coding at all. So at that stage I wasn't limited by what I knew was possible or feasible. But then as I started to settle into my ideas more, and I started watching Daniel Schiffman's Coding Train, and I started learning in my class, which was amazing, I started to realize what was actually feasible. And I also spoke to a software engineer who kind of knows my coding ability or lack thereof, and was able to talk to them about what they thought would be reasonable for me to actually build and achieve in these classes. So then I just went into research, so much watching videos, looking at Stack Overflow, just trying to work out what was and wasn't possible. And sometimes I couldn't get there. Like one thing that I really wanted to do was like a weaving pattern generator. I knew it was possible because I've been to the Computer History Museum. I know that one of the first almost programming like things is the Jacquard loom, but I just could not get there with what I knew at the moment. But then when an idea wasn't feasible, it was okay because I already had that early brainstorming to go back and pick another idea, keep going with it. So one of the big things in this assignment was to think about our creative influences. So again, I'm not coming to this from a computer science background, so I felt like my influences were maybe a bit random, but I think they still worked. So I really like things like the 80s. I was inspired by like 80s films. Like here we've got like Pretty in Pink, things like 16 Candles, a lot of different 80s things like caboodle cases. And then I was also really inspired by artists I like. So Mab Graves with her pop surrealism, Tiffany Pratt with her just amazing use of color. And again, going back to my textiles background, and I also really love kawaii and pastel and that sort of aesthetic. And so then I did create some of my own images for use within the assignment, and yeah, it was pretty easy documentation to put together, but a lot of fun to do and to think about how things that maybe we don't see as clearly relating to code can actually influence our outcomes.